So originally when infographics came into being, there was a lot of just a better way to take numbers and figures and make them less dry, essentially in short, and make them visually look interesting. But in infographics these days, at least for us, are a lot more than that. It's like a visual way, probably very much informed by our illustration background, to be able to take, it can be from process to an overview of somebody's business, or really just about anything you can imagine to explain something and or to still show data visualization in a form that both informs, is on brand, and it's got a funny way to make the client think in a completely different way.
Hey guys, good morning. Well, it's morning where we are anyway. Welcome back to another episode of More Clients, Less Effort. Today, I am excited to be joined by Saul Edmonds, who's the creative director at Roundhouse, a specialist in website, in app development and design, illustration, brand development, and infographic design. And we're going to drill right into infographics a bit more today. But Saul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. It's awesome to be here. It's great. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, mate, tell me more about you, your journey in business. I mean, you describe this as a love story, but I'd love to hear it in your words.
A love story. I did. I forgot that I actually said that, but it's actually true, because that's that's like the fun sort of intro, but it's actually true in that my wife and I run the business, Jill and I, and its nexus. Like the very, very starting point was when we were at pre-2001, we were at the Queensland College of Art studying illustration. We fell in love. And then we had, still in the great, fantastic sort of cliched story. It was true. We often sort of recall this about us going in the early days going, oh, wouldn't it be really cool to have like some great sort of agency where we could, design things and do this and do illustration and then like maybe have an art gallery and, those sort of dreamy sort of states. Yeah. And then like fast forward all these years later, it actually happened. And we were like, funny that actually happened.
Yeah, along came the internet in the interim and changed everything, right?
Yes, yeah, that was the sort of important point. So in the very early days, like 2001, so we've been going in one form or another since then. We've always been doing, generally in the early days of websites, we're very quick adopters, even though in like finishing in whatever it was, 5 or 10 years before that, finished illustration, there was like literally no computers, were like very early use. And so that wasn't a big thing, and very manual, learning the early days of typography and Bromo and typesetting, had to go to the typesetting room with the typesetting guy, all that gear. Then very early adopters of technology. And then Jill she's a musician as well. And so our very early version of Roundhouse, like V1, was as we styled ourselves as like a boutique sound design agency. And we were like, well, that sounds like a great idea. And so we did that, and then got, completely through word of mouth. We weren't doing any advertising. We just ended up hooking up with a bunch of people like us today in agencies and doing sound design for them, and actually got some really great jobs through. I'm not sure actually how we even got these jobs, and then very quickly, the short story is then very quickly we decided that we would be doing everything that we love in our agency. But at the heart, we're kind of, our starting point was, exhibiting artwork and as illustrators. And then that's kind of informed like a lot of things. And we still do that sort of work too today, but that informs a lot of, I guess, like a storytelling sort of approach to things that we really love. And then we're here now, all these years later.
What's been the biggest challenge? Obviously, there's been massive changes, not only in marketing in terms of channels to market, but the technology that we use to create marketing as well. What do you feel has been the biggest changes over time, and how have you guys approached that?
I'd say probably the first thing that pops into my head is, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff relating to print and things, but the most notable things is in websites, the point at which I was using, and we were using things like Dreamweaver to make sites manually.
I remember Dreamweaver.
Dreamweaver, Flash was like a big, poor old Flash, that had a.
We're talking 90s now.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah, terrible, reasonably quick death. Which the catalyst really being the iPhone and things like that, and the agreement that wasn't able to be come to between Adobe and Apple about all of that stuff. And so like Flash and Dreamweaver and doing sites that way with a piece of software, you were designing it, and there was no real content management system. So in my mind, one of the most significant changes that jumps out is the change between then things like WordPress that were a blogging platform just in its early days, then all of a sudden evolving into this requirement for people to edit. And then that became more of a thing, sort of reasonably quickly, it seemed. And then at the same time, responsive or similar time, responsive sites. Because driven by, the rise of different devices and different screen sizes, and then all of a sudden responsive. I remember the specific point where I remember reading about it somewhere and going, responsive, what's that? And it seems so funny to sort of say that now and go, and I was like, what's a responsive site? And now that's the norm because it has to be.
Yeah.
So that change, actually probably upon reflection, probably responsive sites adapting to different screen sizes is probably even more significant in my mind for everything, because it informs a lot of design in terms of maybe simplifying things more in certain design trends.
Yeah, certainly I would think, if you're designing a website now, that being conscious of different size screens is a massive, once upon a time there was no mobile phone. We're sort of going back to 2007 when the iPhone was first released. And we had plenty of sort of websites before that. BlackBerry dominated the early noughties, particularly in a business context. And now we've got so many different size screens, even just in your mobile device. That could be anything from, this size, which is 6.1 or something, to my desktop screen, which still largely dominates the sort of web traffic space. You've got good 50 to 60% still of web traffic is still on desktop.
Slowly
my
reducing.
Screen's 42 inches, right? So
it varies hugely, doesn't it? Like it's massive.
Yeah, there's massive, and there's so many different size ones. I think there's some screens, the big sort of wraparound ones that I know some people have a fully three screens in one kind of thing.
Yeah, so that informs like a lot of different, and it kind of ties a little bit into some of the stuff talk about in terms of infographic based design too, in terms of modularity, like thinking about design on its own merits for something that's going to look great, but then going, okay, how modular is it going to be when I adapt it to a different screen size? Is it going to work well? Is it going to fail miserably? Or then do you have to do a variation on it and everything in between?
I'm curious, Saul, in your experience, obviously, with that design, does, other than just looking good, right, to fit different screen sizes, does it actually make much of a difference in conversion, right? Because any of these assets that we create, web, we're going to drive traffic to them from whatever we drive traffic from, right? Whether that's social media traffic, whether that's skywriting, whether that's, your ad campaign, whether that's, the conversation you're having with somebody who then goes and checks out your website or your web assets or your landing page. How important is it to have that responsiveness from a conversion perspective? How does that affect that?
Well, specifically from, so do you mean in terms of the fact that,
well, say I've got this image that doesn't quite scale properly, right? And images are usually the ones that are terrible because we put a fixed size image that doesn't scale with the right vectors. Does that really affect, if someone doesn't have that in place, on their website, on their landing page, does it really affect the conversion of those sites?
I think probably the correct answer to that is that it's very specific to the content that is either well optimized or not well optimized, in that if it's going to be something on the page that I'm like, say, if it's a infographic that would usually has got a whole heap of detail on it that you really have to pinch or zoom and has got some, it might not be crucial, but in terms of somebody, as a part of the conversion process, I mean, I think some of it is negligible. It's kind of like it would be nice to, but I think probably the reality and like maybe what you're getting to, if it's a leading question, I don't know. Is it, Tim?
That's a little bit of a leading question.
A little bit of a leading question. I get the sense that it is that it's probably neither here or there, but then the actual, because I always view like good design partially as, is it on brand? Does it look nice? But also, is it going to is part of it, if it's not good design, it might be too interfering with another specific message. If it's too cluttered and it's drawing the eye too much, then that's going to interfere probably with conversion. If there's something specific on the page that is an important part, and that's also good design. So it's about having like less is more, in the sense that it doesn't have to be Zen-like and heaps of white space.
Would be interesting in conducting an experiment to just like knock up a page and, one with bad design or poor scaling graphics and everything, and one with really good design, and see what the difference is. It was traffic, because things like just little things like, here's a little arrow, pointing to a call to action. But then when you scale the screen to a different size, the arrow no longer points to the call to action, whether that, how much of a difference that actually makes to your thing. But more importantly, I think from my perspective, when I talk about, what's this sort of customer journey end to end, at some point we're trying to tell our client that we have attention to detail. That is one of the unconscious boxes that we are trying to tick for our customers, right? That we deliver a quality service. And if we kind of can't get some of the stuff right up front, starts to speak and question that quality of service, going, well, if you can't really get your website on point and it's a bit, the graphics don't scale, or it looks a bit funny, or the images aren't vectoring properly, you're not necessarily shouting from the rooftops that you don't deliver a quality service, but potentially there's a little bit of that sort of starts to bring in some questioning about what are you actually doing.
It's reflective.
And as I say this, I realize that I should go and look at my own website and check that out, make sure that's all.
Yeah, but it's reflective. Yeah, but it's true though. It is reflective, and it might not be. And for some brands too, like for example, when I was not that I was looking at their website, but even on their website, places like Chemist Warehouses or brands that have a message that we're cheap and everything is big and fat and heavy and it's got big like bright things and flashing stuff everywhere, and somebody who's looking, so it depends on that's where the importance of design or the lack of, actually, because that's sort of a debatable thing, because that's specific design to make it look cheap and to feel cheap, and that's intentional. So then where things are, on one side, it looking big and fat and heavy and in your face is exactly what they want. And on another side, it's completely the wrong message. So it's exactly what you were saying before, plus what's the intention behind like the aesthetics of it. And where those two things meet, it is sometimes one is more important than the other, but then sometimes it's, more often than not, it's the blending of where those two things meet to find the happy, correct medium. For what you're trying to do, where form meets function.
So true. Let me pivot here, because I want to ask about the challenges of working with your significant other for such a long period of time. Now,
do you, Tim? Okay.
It's 25, 30 years since you and your lovely wife went into business together. How's that?
It's actually been, to be honest, it's always been really good, because, I guess like some business partners who then are husband and wife teams too, it depends on like what people are actually doing in the business, because we're both being creative people and both doing like work. That's been very normal way before we started business. It doesn't mean, it invariably, with a couple of creative people who've got very specific ideas often about things, there's always debates and sometimes heated debates, but that's nothing new. That's
just the reality of having a business partner, right?
Yeah, but then more specifically, like the business side of it has actually always been really easy, to be honest, like the, finances, running the business, because I've been doing a lot of particular roles. We've slotted into our roles that way very easily. More of the challenge that is very normal probably for any couple of creative people talking about briefs and things is sometimes it's like, yeah, absolutely. And I go, what do you think about this? This is great. And I think it's fantastic. And she's like, it's just not very good at all. And then my ego gets crushed and I feel really sad. And then I have to rethink it. But like invariably, not just, I'm saying this because she'll be listening later, but because it's actually true, because then a lot of the times she's actually right. And it's just my ego going, I've worked so hard on that. But to be honest, Tim, it's actually been always very sort of easy with the business side for whatever reason for us. It's worked out really well. It's the creative thinking that I've got a pretty tough skin these days, or at least I think I do. Maybe sometimes I still get a bit sad when.
Yeah, it's usually the way. Usually the way. Mate, you touched on infographics before. We spoke very briefly on those. For our listeners, what is an infographic?
So originally, people would probably know, even if they don't know the term, generally relate for a lot of people in terms of data visualization. So originally, when infographics kind of came into being, there was a lot of just a better way to take numbers and figures and make them, less dry, essentially in short, and make them visually look interesting. But in infographics these days, at least for us, are a lot more than that. It's like a visual way, probably very much informed by our illustration background, to be able to take, it can be from a process to an overview of somebody's business, or really just about anything you can imagine to explain something and or to still show data visualization in a format that both informs, is on brand, and it's got a funny way to make the client think in a completely different way. I've found over the years, this has been my observation about specific things in their business, because they have to, work them with us to visualize something. And that seems to do something very interesting in people's minds, to force them to think about things in a different way, because they're going to, and it's different to a website. And I find it's different to other things because it's encompassing a bunch of ideas or a single idea in one visual.
Yeah. So we're talking about things like maybe your business process, or, how you deploy to a client, or maybe explaining a complex concept, in a few sort of process steps or something, aren't we?
Yeah. So like a few examples. One example is a very simple one. It can be a simple services or solutions overview. So you've got them in a snapshot and you do it in a way that's on brand. And it's very simple, and it just gives people a snapshot instead of having to go to a bunch of different pages. Yep. And then it can also be interactive, or it can be very complex, like this is how you create this, or how this piece of mechanism in some machine works. To explain it in a way, it'd be things like that. Could often be someone's got a concept and they'll have a pitch, and having 100 slides isn't going to do it. You can break it down into a visual or some visuals with content to make it more easily digestible for the viewer.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, and not just for prospects and customers as well. It can also be for supply partners. It can be for employees, to describe, at a high level, this is how a process works, and then it allows you to sort of break down to specific instructions. I think they're incredibly valuable. What's valuable? Why don't people use infographics more?
I think, in short, Tim, is because they don't actually know about them. Like it's a really simple answer, because, and I'm saying this because my overriding experience with infographics is that when people come to us, like for say something else for branding, and then I go, have you considered an infographic for this? And they go, what's an infographic? And then I go, you probably know, and my general answer is you probably know what it is, but you just don't know that it's called an infographic. And then I show them examples and they go, oh, yes. And
Those things.
yeah, but it's always, oh, yeah, they're literally always people are like, oh, yeah, they're fantastic. And people are always like, there's this special, I'd like hasten to use the word sort of magic, but there's a certain interesting combination when they're well done that brings things together, and people intuitively know why they work because of this meeting of information and design, which is very specific to infographics.
Yeah, I must admit, I mean, if you don't know what it is, just get on Google right now on your phone or whatever device you're on.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's scaled, it's responsive.
Yeah, and if you don't,
and just do a search for infographic, and you'll see what we're actually talking about. I find them incredibly valuable, and I must admit I hadn't used them for a long time, and I don't know why I hadn't used them in my own business, right? Because I'd seen them in other people's, and yeah, they're fantastic. But I started actually using an infographic of our rollout process and said, you are here. This is where you're going to start, and this is what we're going to do first. And we call that our sort of foundational stages, where we look at, what lead generation system we're going to dial in for you and what your lead management system is, right? So your CRM, right? And then what's the strategy underpinning that, right? So that's our little foundations bundle. Then we go into our flow stage and our freedom stage, right? But describe this as an infographic. And it's just like 7 boxes that says, here we are. This is what we're going to do first. This is what we're going to do next. And this is where we're hopefully going to finish up. And the number of people are like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Rather than trying to describe the complexity of setting up a lead generation system, right? And how that would all work. And then rather the complexity of going into, this is all the automations we're going to build for you in a CRM system and how it works, right? Just really simplifying down to be able to communicate, more easily what it is. Almost plays back into our childlike brain where we had picture books, and here is a chicken crowing, here's a rooster crowing, and here's a cow mooing, and da da da.
100%. Yeah, I mean, but then it's not enough in infographics then specifically for it to be like just look great, like the information, especially if there's a lot of information, because I've had numerous times that did run recently where the client had like way too much information even to go across these 7 infographics. But what we ended up doing was having a sort of roadmap, and then it was able to be an interactive one too, where there was a primary one, an overview, and then it was able to drill down in a way like it ended up being a presentation too, where you could zoom in and dive into the journey and sort of zoom in and see the other parts. So great thing about infographics is that they're very sort of scalable to be used as motion graphics, in print, interactive, you name it.
Yeah, so true. So true. Let me drill in further because I want to know what the process is, right? So, we know that this is probably a good thing to have in your business.
Yeah.
What's your process to create an infographic? How do we start digesting, this sort of detail down into kind of this macro level?
Yeah. So we'll use, I guess, a more complex one, because when it comes to, say, a services, when there's only like a few data points, let's call them data points, even if that's just sort of text, that can be fairly straightforward. But like the overriding initial thing, like a lot of stuff, I guess, is what's going to be the purpose? Like where and how are you going to be using the infographic? If it's going to be a really great all-rounder, like, some of the great all-round cricketers or sports people that are really good at a bunch of stuff, then, okay, that's very important information, because infographics, exactly like we were talking about too, if you go, I really wanted this infographic specifically to be for mobile viewers, it's like, okay, that's kind of important information, because then the level of complexity, then it should be, maybe if it still has to have all this information, it's got to be tall and thin, or it's got to be broken down, or it's got to be animated. So that's the first thing, is it's fit for purpose. Where is it going to be used? And then on what devices, if it's on devices, if it's a printed poster, etc. All that's like point number 1, at the same time as going, okay, what is it about? What content have you got? then going like, what do you want to express? And then I see our role is always to then go, okay, you've got X amount of content and you're saying this, let's find the midpoint where there's a happy place between those two things so that that can work for you. And then we end up, it's a very organic sort of process where we find that meeting point of then making suggestions and go, you've got way too much information, or sometimes you've got too little information for this to be as informative in the specific way. And then for us as brand designers too, for us to go find out particular things about people's brand if we're not already familiar with it, so that this infographic tool can become a really good brand tool for them as well, for visually and information, because they do have the potential to be, you know, even if the intention isn't for them to be the great all-rounder, they certainly can be, and they can be, you know, act as like a key, you know, sort of alongside the logo as a visual. It's not people's primary, you know, thing with their brand. It's much more than that, of course, but it can be a primary, you know, asset that is well used if it's well done. And then we just go through the process of actually doing generally a version of a wireframe and seeing how that's going to fit in with the data points and information they've got with all the other things we talked about, and then roll it out from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a process, isn't it? It's not just a case of slapping a few images on a page and then going, oh, we're done.
No, definitely not with infographics.
The skill really is in, you know, pulling out the sort of major points that you're trying to express, and how do we summarize, you know, the complex down into the simple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then especially when it comes, like a good example is ones we've been doing more actually for people is where there's a board of directors. They're all very busy people. They've got a short amount of time, and people want an infographic done that captures a bunch of information about the previous year or statistics across parts of the business or corporation in a single snapshot, or one or two, or one snapshot. So people can go, right, okay. And it can be fairly detailed, but it's usually always up on the big screen. And you can have a lot of detail, but then to, you know, do it in such a way still that it's, you know, the key thing is being easily digestible for those who are intended to be looking at it.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, we want traffic lights. We want to know how the business is going. You know, red, green, yellow. And
you
know, or not the sort of A3 page or A0 page of 6-point font with all the data.
Yeah, and that's super common. Yeah, and people, I get it. I mean, there's a lot of, like, this is all really important information. And I've had to, I mean, I'm not a business coach or a business analyst, talk with those people, but then I often have to, you know, go, okay, well, I don't understand all this yet. You've explained which, and I have to go, what are the key points? Because you've got 50 pages here and you're saying you want it on one infographic, that it's never going to happen. So then you have to make decisions about what is this, and then you can provide that other report for the people who love reading lots and lots and lots of content, and those people are out there. But then the purpose of this is to provide a snapshot. It's not to replicate all the other stuff. So then I end up having to go, okay, let's remove the wheat from the chaff. What's the important stuff? And then make decisions around that for design.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're convinced now. If you're not convinced that you need infographics in your business, by now you definitely should be. Mate, we normally finish out the podcast with a bit of a quick fire. You have not been pre-warned of these questions, so
no, I have not.
We go with these.
Yeah.
But let's finish up today with a couple of questions. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Best compliment? Oh, actually, a recent one, which made me feel pretty good, was that I think or something along these lines, that you seem to be pretty good at podcasting. This is in relation to my own podcast. So that made me feel good because I don't usually think about it.
Nice.
Yeah. If
you could go back to your 18-year-old self and give yourself one piece of advice as you go into design school, what would that piece of advice be?
Ask my parents to give me more advice.
Okay.
Because
what's an underrated tool that you think is indispensable for your job right now?
My wife.
She'd love to know that she's the tool.
She's an invaluable one.
What's
Literally.
the source of your inspiration?
Well, actually, probably my family. My wife and my little boy.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Mate, what's a common myth about website designers or your expertise that you disagree with?
These are great questions. Probably that 100% of the time that we're sitting behind the computer, even though it's true a lot of the time, a lot of us actually really like to get out and about and do physical things.
Yeah, which rolls into favorite physical thing to do?
Squash.
There we go. Squash player.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
If you won $10 million tomorrow, what would you spend it on?
Start an art gallery and work on very specific large projects that we've already been thinking about.
Yeah, nice. Saul, really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much,
sharing
Tim.
with us your expertise. You can find more about Saul over at roundhouse.cc. You'll see a fantastic infographic on the website right there. Scroll down a little bit. You'll find all of the service offerings that Roundhouse, the creative agency, provide. You can also follow and connect with Saul on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Roundhouse. Saul, any parting words?
Just really appreciate what you're doing, Tim. It's a great podcast, and I really like those last questions. They were great, and I'm glad that I didn't know them in advance because I would have overthought it like I usually do. So thank you. Great. Really appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Designer's curse, mate. You're always overthinking, go, what if I do that differently?
That's right. Yeah. Can't help it. Sorry.
What if I add an extra pixel into that?
Yes. Exactly.
Guys, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like, subscribe, comment. We'd love a rating, or share it with someone that you know that would get value from listening in to our weekly show. Saul, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you all again next time. Take care.
Thanks, Tim.